The 540 is brought to you by StarCityGames.com's weekly sale. Head over to StarCityGames.com/sale and take advantage of our Welcome to 2022 sale, Part 2. From now until Sunday, January 16th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time, you can save 20.22% on select Magic the Gathering singles, because that's the year that it is. You might be thinking, that's a weird percentage to discount something by, 20.22%. That doesn't make any sense. And you'd be right. But what does make sense is you saving some money. So save yourself some money on some Magic cards at StarCityGames.com/sale.
Hello there from Dominario's Judgment, a weekly podcast for Star City Games with me, Dom Harvey.
And me, Ari Lax.
Where we bring you the latest, greatest, and downright weirdest things Modern has to offer.
Want to know what to expect for next weekend's events? We've got you covered.
Do you want deep breakdowns of the hot topics and decks in Modern? We've got you covered.
Just want to make sure you don't miss the latest nonsense before your opponents teach you a lesson about it in the queues? Oh yeah, we have definitely got you covered. Find us every week on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Or if you want to head over to StarCityGames.com, we'll be right there alongside all the great content from all your other favorite content producers.
The 540 is also brought to you by Coalesce Apparel and Design. Head over to coalesceapparel.shop and use gift code SCG at checkout to save 10% off your entire order. If you want to rep the coolest Magic the Gathering themed hoodies and t-shirts or stickers, head over to coalesceapparel.shop. Maybe you want to rep our fallen friend Golos with the Tireless Pilgrim versus the Multiverse shirt. Or maybe you're Wooburg Forever and you want to go with the South Beach collection. Any way you want to do it. Anti-Mulligan Club? We got you. MTG Jam? Of course. And all of the Keeping It 100 line, there for you, coalesceapparel.shop. Use gift code SCG at checkout for 10% off your entire order. Nobody made what they wanted, so they made it themselves.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another fresh episode of the 540. We did have to take last week off, but now we are back, not with a vengeance, but we are back all the same. I am Ryan Overturf. You can find me at Ryan Overdrive on Twitter, and this week I'll be joined once again by Ryan Saxe. Ryan, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing well. I'm Ryan Saxe, and you can find me at RC Saxe on Twitter.
Some news for fans who have been listening to the 540 since we started the podcast. Initially, the show did start with myself co-hosting with Justin Parnell. If you follow Justin's Twitter at jparnell1, he has had a lot of personal stuff going on. You can find out what's going on with Justin. Long story short, for the podcast purposes, Justin is taking some personal time. He's going to be spending more time with his family. He is stepping away from making content for the foreseeable future. Justin, if you're listening, it was an absolute pleasure working with you. Really love the structure you brought to the podcast, kept us in line, really got the show off the ground. Appreciate all that. And I wish the absolute best to you and your family in the future from here. So yeah, that's kind of a heavy note.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is the state of things. So now you got a couple Ryans talking about Cube. We're back after a week off, and this week we're talking about kind of a very niche Cube topic. Cube is already, you got your subsection of Magic. When you talk about Cube, the word used to mean a lot more than it does, at least in terms of specificity. There are so many different kinds of cubes. And this week we're talking about Modular Cubes, which is a subsection of a subsection. So we're getting really deep into it. So let's start things off with some definitions. Ryan, what are we talking about when we say modular cubes?
Right. So a modular cube, or just the concept of it is really about having pieces that you can interchange. It's about having a cube in which you can you have a set of cards that you can remove and a set of cards that you can add that makes the cube function differently. Most commonly, you'll see this on sort of like an archetype level. So in my personal classic cube for a while, I had a storm module where I had a set of cards that I could take out and a set of cards that I could put in. That module was about 60 cards. And then storm would be a draftable archetype. So a modular cube is going to be a cube that has, any number of modules. I've seen people do it with a large number, and they can have plenty of different sort of pieces. It's almost like it's not exactly like Jumpstart, if you know what I mean, but it's like you're taking these different pieces and you're mashing them together, and that comes together to make a very modular cube.
Yeah, I do like the idea of a Jumpstart style cube thing, and that would fall in the range. There was kind of a lot of different things that could be met by modular cube, so at the risk of overloading somebody who's completely unfamiliar with the topic for information, the baseline is just that there is more than one part of the cube. There are sections of cards that you can shuffle together, and then you keep them distinctly separate in between drafts for different purposes. Ryan mentioned having just a storm module where you can have storm in the cube or not. Shuffle the storm stuff in when you want to play a storm draft. Don't play with those cards if you're not getting into that. And the more extreme side of it, the way I was first introduced to the idea is there would be like a base module. And there's going to be a lot of variables here. What size are your modules? What exactly are they trying to accomplish? Most commonly, when I see people discuss this or when I look at other people's project, there's kind of a basic, like, usually good mana fixing. Like, this is where you would find like fetch lands or ABU duels and just like some generically good cube cards is kind of your base module. And then you would see different archetypes. You mentioned Storm as an example. You could have your Reanimator module, which you can play with or not in different capacities. You know, when I first heard of the module for a while, unfortunately, I can't dredge this stuff up. I had a bunch of files on Cube Tutor where I'd be like, this is the blue devotion module. And I tried to map things out in these disparate packages where it'd be like a 60 or a 90 card base module, and then something like 45 card, just archetype specific modules. And you could choose any number of the archetypes and you could shuffle them together. Or it can just be something, again, on the other side where here's two things, you play with one or both. So kind of a lot going on there. It's really funny. And if you're listening and you have kept together one cube, or you find the idea of even building your first cube kind of daunting, you might be thinking that sounds like a lot of work. Logistically, that sounds challenging. And you're absolutely right. My first exposure to this, my friend Mike had started to work on a modular cube, and he had, I believe it was 90 cards as the base module, and they had inner sleeves and they were stamped with the letter A, and I never saw the B sleeves. And over time, all those A sleeves would start showing up in different decks or cubes, and can be a really daunting process. The idea behind this, though, is just that you have kind of a controlled variance where you have this kind of niche archetypes or maybe some cards you want to play with sometimes, but you keep them with the like elements. So it's not just like, I want the Storm deck to have variance, and I'm going to have Storm in my 720 card cube, and sometimes I won't see Tendrils. It's more like, I'm going to deliberately put Tendrils of Agony and all these rituals in my cube, specifically when I want them all to be part of a draft.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, variance is a really big part of designing a cube in both positive and negative ways, right? You want to control how often something shows up. Something actually interesting to discuss with respect to modular cube. You know, for example, when I had different modules for my personal cube, the size was always still 540. I have seen other people do it differently. I'm curious the way that you've seen it as well, is where when you have sort of, you know, these modules, you're always in the 360 setting. It's about you have this, you know, 540, 720, whatever, and you get 8 people together. And then when you package everything that you're going to be drafting, you know, 100% of each module is going to be present in the draft.
Mm-hmm. And so have you worked much with your own modular cubes? Do you have much experience beyond having the Storm module?
I have done the Storm module is like the first time that I messed around with this. I've done this with like archetypes. It's how actually the persist archetype started in my cube, if that makes sense. I like made a persist module that like wasn't in for a while. Again, I was drafting my cube pretty frequently and I wanted to test something out. So I built the module, I tried it out, and then the next time we drafted it, it wasn't even there. And that sort of let me test the waters. I've never built like a full on modular cube. So my main experience with it are archetypal modules.
Okay, right on.
But I've done it more than once.
I definitely like that as a way to just kind of play test adding an archetype. You mentioned using that to introduce persist combo. Ultimately, you just have your classic cube, and persist combo is just part of this traditional non-modular cube. But I do like that as something where you just say, okay, I'm going to try this module. I'm going to try playing with all these cards. And if it works, great. And if it not, well, then this module is going in the garbage.
Yeah, well, one of the other things, and this was the case with the Storm module, is that it actually ended up being, I feel like almost everybody I cubed with had the same opinion of, this is really fun and I like it, but let's keep it to maybe 1 month in the year that it exists. And so it ends up not being a desired mainstay, but a nice way of spicing things up. And that's almost one of the reasons I got like more excited about experimenting with it. Why I built the persist combo as a module at the beginning, although again, it did end up staying forever. And I don't really envision myself ever cutting it. But I do think that it's possible that persist combo could have been kind of like the Storm module as well, where like, look, this is fun, this is cool, I don't want it here all the time, but I can keep these cards together and introduce it should we ever decide to.
Right on. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So that's the topic for today. We're talking about modular cubes. For our next segment, we're going to talk about some broad strokes. What does this look like? How do you do this? Some more talk about actually approaching if you want to have a modular cube with that controlled variance with the modules that you feature all of or none of in a particular draft. And then we're going to get into some specific examples. For me, that's going to mean working with modular tuberts, using individual 180 card cubes to shuffle together for a 360 card 8-player experience. I've already written a couple articles on this. Maybe you've read them on StarCityGames.com. But I have some additional thoughts, some thoughts on what I've already built and presented, and some thoughts on where modular cubes, or modular tuberts rather, can go from here. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to take our first commercial break, and we'll be back with some of those broad strokes notes on modular cubes.
Look, we're all Magic players here, so I know you're probably like me. And you have some extra cards that are hanging around that you would love to sell for cash, or maybe trade in for some more cards. Well, if you're looking to sell or trade your Magic the Gathering cards, it has literally never been easier. Visit StarCityGames.com/sell with a 30% store credit trade-in bonus and the fastest turnaround time in the industry. There is no reason to sell to anybody else. We have 4 convenient ways to sell your cards to us. 1, check out our buy list. You can find out exactly what we're paying for each of your cards individually right now. That too much work? Number 2, check out our ship and sell program. Put your cards in a box, tape it up, send it to us. We'll do the rest of the work. Or if you're passing through Roanoke, Virginia, come visit Star City Comics and Games, and we can sit down with a buyer and work out a trade right there in the store. Or if you might be a store and you're looking to offload bulk and you have over 500,000 cards you're looking to sell, we can come to you. Any of the ways that you want to work with us, go to StarCityGames.com/sell. That's SELL right now for more information.
All right, welcome back to our episode on modular cubes here on the 540. We're going to talk about just kind of general notes. If you are interested in constructing a modular cube, how do you want to go about it? I think that the really big question, generally, if you're first hearing about this concept, you certainly, with how daunting it sounds logistically, is going to be just logistically, how do I make this function? And I told that story at the top of the show about my friend just having those stamped cards. And you do kind of have to do something like that if you have these cards that are moving in and out. How did you manage doing the modules, your Storm module and your persist module in terms of that?
So this is actually really funny. I didn't realize until we started talking that this would come up, but so I don't have like an eidetic photographic memory. But my memory is, I have ADHD. I had to get like assessed for the ADHD to be able to get extra time on tests as a kid and all of that. One of the most common symptoms related to ADHD is a poor working memory. It's not, causal in the sense like if you don't have it, you can't have ADHD, and if you do have it, you do have ADHD. But this is a long-winded way of saying my working memory is, many standard deviations to the right, and I actually never needed to add any markings. I just knew which cards were. I could have a bunch of different modules and I just know where all the cards were and I could sort them after, no problem.
Sure.
But that's actually one of the reasons why I ended up doing it. I don't think I would have done it if I felt like I had to add markings. And I actually think that one of the this idea of modular cubes, almost every cube designer I've ever talked to has thought about doing it and never actually done it for their own cube, because it is a significant amount of effort, especially if you need to start sort of modifying things. What I did try at the beginning, I was like instead of like a stamp necessarily, just like taking like a Sharpie, and on the bottom left of any sleeve, like just putting a dot of different colors. So you have different colored Sharpies, and different modules have different dots, different color dots. That way you can like easily sort of fan through cards and sort them. But overall, I just ended up making it a habit to always sort my cube at the end. And I know what cards are where. Also, part of that had to do with I was often cubing with a bunch of strangers in New York. And so I would always count my cube after we cubed to just make sure that all the cards were there. So sorting it at the end was never really a pain.
Sure, yeah, 2 birds with 1 stone on that front. That makes sense, though. For some of us, myself included, it's going to be really difficult to keep track of these things without using some kind of marking. So step 1, definitely just track your cube list somewhere. We talk about Cube Cobra. It certainly comes up enough on the podcast.
Nope.
You're on Cube Cobra, yeah? That's how you manage your cubes?
Yeah. I do. I very much enjoy Cube Cobra.
Yeah, Parnell use a lot of spreadsheets, which is it's tougher going for me as well. But Cube Cobra does make it pretty easy. So just having the list in the event that whatever your tracking system is fails, you at least have a reference point there. That's going to be a big deal. And then I definitely encourage using some kind of marking. Here's a fun anecdote. So the best way, in my opinion, you don't want to actually damage your cards. So marking on an inner sleeve makes a lot of sense to me, because if you mark on an outer sleeve, it can get worn out or whatever. So you want to mark on an inner sleeve. But yeah, I had this experience of seeing this nice A stamp on my friend's cards. And so I just kind of, without thinking too much about it, bought some stamp ink and some stamps. And it turns out that you need specific ink for it to stay on a plastic sleeve. It'll smudge right off. It will literally never dry. It's just a chemical thing. So you need to make sure you're using ink that can actually dry on a sleeve. You mentioned Sharpies by name. Sharpies actually will just stay adhered to an inner sleeve. I use perfect cards. Sharpie on a perfect card. That will work for your purposes, but make sure you're actually trying to use a mark that will stay on what you are trying to mark.
It's definitely good advice.
Yeah. With color-coded Sharpies, those will work. If you want to get something fancier like the stamps, make sure you have some stamping that will stick to plastic. It exists. You have to make sure you do your research. Cost you a couple more bucks, but whatever. And then you want to keep them separated. I do have one experience when I first started working on the modular 2-birds where I kind of just built a second cube that was supposed to complement the original 2-bird, and then they could be played together because the second one was literally designed for this purpose. And just as a run, before getting too committed into it, I didn't want to double sleeve and mark up not just this new cube, but also go back and retroactively do that to an existing cube. So the first few times I played it, we just shuffled them together, and I mostly was able to separate them. Here's where you run into some trouble. So it's probably a little bit easier on a card-by-card basis to determine if a card is in a base cube or a storm module, for example. Hey, here's Dark Ritual. Where does that go? I get to like 160, 165 of the 180 very confidently. But if you ask me which Doomblade is in which cube,
Oh God,
that becomes pretty difficult. Like you can figure out most of it, but not all of it.
Well, at least in that case, if you're wrong, is it like
you won't be wrong by much,
right? Like it's not gonna like necessarily ruin the experience where it's like, oh, the storm module's in, but where's brain freeze?
Yeah, that's a much bigger deal.
Right.
Or just having brain freeze just in your regular cube with no storm support.
Yeah.
So the big lesson there, just keep a list, mark them if you're able. And so that's kind of the general logistical notes. And then as for what a modular cube looks like, we alluded to this at the top of the show. There's a lot of different ways you can do this. So when you talk about having the storm or the persist module with your cube, we're talking about just having an additional module with a full cube that can be drafted otherwise, right?
Yes. I mean, I messed with it in a few different ways. So like I definitely have done the take out cards, 4 cards, but generally speaking, I have a 540 card cube. And when I worked with these modules, the cube increased in size. It wouldn't necessarily go all the way up. Maybe I had some ideas of like, maybe I just trimmed cards that like I knew weren't seeing play so that it wouldn't get so much bigger. But yeah, it was just, I would construct what are the set of cards that would make this thing work and then jam them in the cube.
Nice. Yeah, that's a really cool way to do it. And that's one of the lowest effort ways to actually have this module you can draft with or without. And I actually really like Storm as an example. I keep coming back to it there because it is the sort of thing where sometimes you can have fun playing Storm, but if it's an all the time thing and you spend your time just watching your opponent play, I can see how a lot of players will get tired of that as well. And so that's
you can't have candy all the time for every meal.
As much as we want.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, that's definitely a thing where you can just have your sometimes archetype or archetypes and shuffle them in some ways. But on the more extreme side of it, and you made the point that is absolutely true to my experience, that I know more people that I have talked about this with that have expressed interest in building a modular cube that's fully modular, and none of them have ever done it. Like they take these strides. But if you are interested in this extreme cube that has to have parts put together to play at all, something that makes sense, you need to have sort of minimum thresholds for people to be able to play it. So usually you are going to have this kind of base module, which I'll reiterate, probably has some good mana fixing, probably has some generically good spells, cantrips, doom blades, just good creatures on rate. And then you have to determine what size these things need to be. And this is all informed by some stuff that you already know. How many cards do you need to cube with 8 people? Well, if we're trying to emulate a traditional booster draft, 3 15-card packs, we need 360 cards. So how many modules do you want that to be? Well, you probably are going to start designing your base module, and you'll get up to a number of cards that you're happy with. Maybe it's a small number. More likely, it's going to be at least 90, just to get you going. That's kind of the number of cards where you start having something that at least kind of informs a play environment. Less information like that, I'm not really convinced that you can, unless you are much smarter than I am, I'm not really sure you can start informing a play experience with fewer than 90 cards. Do you have any differing thoughts on that?
Given that I haven't done this from scratch myself, it's hard for me to have an intuition around the number, but especially given that I imagine quite a few of those are dedicated to non-basic lands, it's going to be pretty hard, yeah.
Right. And then you could have additional modules that are the same size. I think in general, you probably want your modules to be one player's worth of cards. It just kind of makes sense to have 45 cards in a module just because you are climbing towards this number that people will draft with. So on that front, it does kind of make sense to me to do it in a way that is just math. And you can take 45 cards and you can just seed a 1, 2, 3 color section. Your cube's going to get really weird, though, in terms of color balance. If you have your modules and you have like this module is Golgari Delirium. So on that front, my intuition is going to be to bias towards more cards in your modules, just to keep up with color balance. Maybe you don't mind if your cube is imbalanced, and that's totally fine too. And you could certainly do a full modular cube where you have a bunch of different modules that, for example, they're all blue and or red. And then it's actually just not that big of a deal if you follow the color balance. But I think more cards will help you push towards a coherent play environment and maintaining color balance. A note I want to say that I think has kind of been unstated, that I think we should say explicitly. I will remind listeners that myself and you, Ryan Saxe, we like Singleton cubes.
Yes.
So in the course of talking about these modules, that's going to be my implicit bias. When I'm talking about cube, I'm typically referring to Singleton environments. The texture of these things will change significantly if you allow yourself to break Singleton, because then you can start having overgrown tomb in literally every module that's trying to push a Golgari archetype. And that's actually a good way to do it if you have a bunch of different modules, for example, and you just want to make sure there's good mana fixing to support whatever archetype is showing up in those modules.
Yeah, and then it doesn't even matter if your colors are imbalanced, because actually the mana bases and the density of cards are going to be balanced for what you're providing, right? If you don't have if somehow you decide to choose no modules that support white, which, to be honest, if I was choosing some modules, I could see myself doing that. Well, that's totally fine, because generally speaking, you're not going to end up with any white non-basics, and you're going to have a balance. It may be like literally in terms of numerical numbers per color unbalanced, but if every module itself is self-contained with what it needs, then you're effectively just increasing variance, which is not necessarily a bad thing, by adding them all together. What I mean by that, and I think it's something that a lot of people may not necessarily understand with Magic, but let's say if I have a Magic deck, I think there's a Frank Carson article literally about this, and it is just basic forests, and then like some green, some mono green creature. As you draw cards, as your deck gets changes in size, the probability distribution of what you see changes in a way that like variance isn't constant across all those sizes. Mm-hmm. And so if you have a self-contained module, like a Golgari module, say, that is self-contained, it's Golgari, it's balanced within itself. The more modules you add, the more variance within that particular Golgari archetype you're going to have in your cube experience. Because the size is getting bigger. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's something to be aware of. It's why I think I alluded to at the beginning. Generally speaking, when I see a lot of like fully modular cubes, they're coming together to be a 360 card cube.
Right. You do run into big issues. And I'm glad you made that point, because when you're trying to support, certainly if your modules get into more niche archetypes, and I believe that for a lot of cube designers, that's actually the space that's most compelling for a modular cube, right? Because the draft experience for very niche cube archetypes, the draft lanes tend to be very rigid. You have maybe parasitic archetypes or just things that are kind of obvious what you're supposed to be drafting. And so that they end up being those sometimes archetypes. And you do need this volume of support for them. An example is going to be Enchantress. Have you ever worked with Enchantress as a cube archetype?
Not in a cube of my own, but a friend of mine, it's one of their favorite things to do in Magic in general. So their cubes tend to have it, but I haven't.
Yeah, so I have kind of an enchantment emphasis in my Peasant Tubert, and I have a different cube I never wrote about that had a heavy Enchantress theme. And something you'll notice when you work with an archetype that specific is you just need a bonkers number of enchantments. You need so many enchantments that you can just get cards that are enchantments. You want to have so many of those on every turn. And you also just need to put enough in the cube that it's not just there's one Enchantress deck, and if you get it, you get it. Because if you fall shy, your deck is just like non-functional. As an example that's maybe closer to the average listener, like if you ever try to play an archetype, like Artifacts Matter deck on the Magic Online Vintage Cube, there are some cards, like I think that Metal Worker is fringe playable, but very good in the decks that it's good in. And I think that Koldatha Forge Master is like this card that borders on unplayable, but I happily play it. I try to wheel it, to be clear, but there's these decks that I happily play it in. But the thing about artifacts is like there's just so many historically powerful cards, you'll just kind of get there sometimes. Where with Enchantress, it's like you have to consolidate certain just types of effects into enchantments. And you have your mana ramp be kind of in these enchant land, like fertile ground kind of spaces, pivoting from the creatures just to make sure the stuff works and just have a higher volume. Like Seal of Doom is going to be your 3 mana or black removal spell, just because you just need so many enchantments. Like if you want the deck to show up in every draft, realistically, you need to have stuff that supports at least 2 drafters worth of playables.
Yep.
And then the modular thing, keeping the cube size small is one way to do it. And a point that I'll come back to is you almost kind of want cross-pollination for another thing. It's just subtle ways to make sure that things keep working across your modules. I'll come back to that when I talk about this in terms of modular tuberts. But there's some easy ways to do that. We mentioned breaking Singleton in terms of mana fixing, just making sure that the lands are there to make your archetypes work. But if you have a bunch of niche archetypes, just kind of making it so, maybe you have Enchantress, and then another one of your modules is Delirium. Well, that asks you for some enchantments, right? So it makes sense to kind of cross-pollinate these in both directions. Obviously, you put some enchantments like Seal of Fire in the Delirium module, but you could have, second copy of Seal of Fire in your Enchantress module, for example, or just stuff that would naturally go to the graveyard.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because while we're talking about this in the context of Modular Cube, I think it's maybe the number one lesson I would give anybody who is either trying to get better at cube design or get into cube design, is when you're building your cube and you have a vision for an archetype, how that affects your cube is not just about that archetype. And it's very important to try and leverage every card that you can in as many different spaces inside your cube as possible. It's one of the reasons why I personally find supporting Delirium to be one of the most engaging and exciting aspects of cube design. It asks me to look for a suite of other cards, but you find very interesting cross synergies between that and many other archetypes, because there are archetypes like Enchantress looking for card types, a specific card type like artifacts in that way as well.
Yeah, and that is kind of the thing about when I had those old files on Cube Tutor and just looking at a 45 card list of cards and thinking, yeah, that'll make an archetype work. You shuffle those into a 360 card environment, and 45 cards on their own, certainly if you're spreading it across 5 colors, you can make some broad stroke stuff work. If I had a tokens module, for example, and across all 5 colors, I just had things that incentivized you controlling a lot of creatures and maybe some token generators. For example, blue has Whirler Rogue and Opposition, and red has Goblin Bombardment and Siege Gang Commander, and green has Craterhoof Behemoth and Deranged Hermit. You can make sense of a lot of broad stroke stuff. And the thing about those cards is they're just good. Like it's not unrealistic that these would show up in your base module, at least some of those cards. And in order to make things really work, just kind of having that general playability goes a long way into making a cube function. So even if you are kind of trying to have this modular cube with this controlled variance with these different modules, you do want to make sure that stuff just generally is playable and generally works. To the extent that you want to get super specific, in a roundabout way, you kind of have to just plant seeds for the specific stuff across the whole cube.
Yeah, big agree, both in Modular Cube and regular cube, but especially here. I think the notes that you made about Deranged Hermit and everything is really important. When you're designing a modular cube, you have that base. I think it's pretty easy to fall into what I would at least call a trap of defining that base and then not touching it as you go and create your other modules. Being able to say, like you only have 90 cards or whatever for your base, or maybe you even make that base bigger. And you may find out Deranged Hermit is just a great green 5. I'm going to add it to the base. And, I have this Selesnya tokens module, and also the Golgari theme actually bleeds into sacrifice with stuff like Poison Tip Archer and Catacomb Sifter. And so I want to make sure that the green part of my main module can intersect as much as possible with these other green archetypes that could easily be put inside.
Definitely. Then we're getting to the point. I think that there's some really good broad stroke stuff about kind of assembling a modular cube. For me, I had, the aha moment of making the modular Tubert work at some point. And I wasn't the only person that had the idea once we started drafting with 180 regularly. So I have more experience and more points that I can make that are closer to me about that. I think the broad notes here about having a base module and just making sure that however niche you want to go with your archetypes, you actually have draftable decks if you want to put a modular cube with more modules together. But do you have any other broad notes you want to touch on before we shift to the next section here?
No, other than, if this excites you, try it out. It may be a little daunting, but it can definitely be cool, rewarding, and novel.
For sure. Yeah, so that's some food for thought, broad strokes, modular cubes. Now we'll take another break and we'll be back to talk about modular Tuberts. What's up, gamers? Taking a break from the pod to talk to you about Star City Games Premium and why, if you're not already a member, you really should become one. First of all, the price is great. Only $7.99 a month. That's less than the price of one collector booster. And for that, you get all the following. You get a 5% discount on all Magic the Gathering sealed product, including the aforementioned collector booster, a 10% discount on all Magic the Gathering singles, if that's more your speed, and as well as a 15% discount on all supplies. It's going to be your deck boxes, your binders, your sleeves. Lord knows I always need more sleeves for cubes and all the Magic cards I have lying around. And you also get free entry into some SCG Tour online events. Definitely check those out. And finally, last but certainly not least, you get exclusive access to Star City Games website content from a stable of some of the game's greatest and most entertaining minds. You know who we are. You know where to find us. Sign up for SCG Premium today at starcitygames.com/join-premium. Welcome back, everybody. It is time now to talk about modular cubes through the lens of modular Tuberts. If you haven't heard of this, Tuberts, the 180 card cube format that I have kind of championed on starcitygames.com for a little over a year now, tend to be drafted with 2 to 4 players. And then the modular Tubert is going to be a cube, a 360 card cube. It could just be realistically some other multiple of 180, but what we've worked with so far, what I've written about so far, is a 360 card cube that has 2 Tuberts kind of as modules that can be played independently or together. And by the time that I was able to write my inaugural Tubert article and I had started doing some follow-ups, I had the modular Tubert idea kind of in my back pocket for a while. And it was really funny because at some point before I was able to express these thoughts publicly, you had started tweeting at me and kind of messaging me about the idea of, you called it 2 Tuberts.
Yeah, I got really excited. Because I love Cube, obviously. That's why I'm here, right? I used to host a weekly or bi-weekly Cube event that, 16 people would come. We would draft, 8 pot of my cube, and then somebody else would bring their cube, and we would do that. But especially with COVID and just how life is going, I recognized recently that that's not going to be happening in the same way for the foreseeable future. And I was thinking about building Tuberts because of it, because I see a friend and we can very easily, I've drafted my cube one-on-one with a friend many, many, many times. And it's fun, but you miss so much of the experience when you see such a minimal part of the card pool of a bigger cube. Mm-hmm. And that got me really excited about the idea of Tuberts. However, I am an 11 out of 10 extrovert, like really as far extrovert as you could possibly imagine. And so the idea of not having like the idea of like the cubes that I invest in and have not facilitating like a very large social experience, it made me shy a little bit away from Two Birds at the beginning, because I really wanted, like, if I'm going to put my heart and soul into this, I want to be able to share that in this sort of bigger social setting. And so that made me thinking, like, can I build two different Two Birds? And, I will mostly, when I have a friend over, I can play with one or the other, depending on my mood, what we want. But that if I'm in the position to have 8 people over, I can mash them together and have that be a positive experience. And so to me, I want to be very clear when I'm thinking about Two Birds, and I think we're aligned on this. When I'm thinking about why I called it Two Birds, is the focus to me is the Two Birds. I want both individual Two Birds to be as like lean and positive an experience as possible, because that's the main way the cube is going to be interacted with. However, it is important to me that it is a positive experience when you mash the two together, but it doesn't need to be as pristine.
Yeah, I'm definitely of the same mind there, where the reason that this is where I actually started assembling these cubes as my first actual physical crack at a modular cube is if the parts are individually playable. If I have two 180 card cubes, two Two-Birds that are both just fun to play on their own, I have 2 successes. And if they play well together, awesome, that makes 3. But I'll have at least 2 if I have 2 cubes that I'm happy to play.
Yeah, exactly. So, when I originally came to you and was asking a bunch of questions, I knew that, first off, I just want to tell you, your Tempo Two-Bird is brilliant. I think it's awesome. And I knew I was going to get it. And so I wanted to see like what what would complement it in a way that would be fun. And also, be a type of Magic that people would like to play. So when I went for the Two-Birds, if I were to be completely optimizing for my own selfish needs and nothing about the play experience when I'm mashing them together, I would have built another combo Two-Bird, because basically those are the 2 types of Magic I play. Like very lean, very interactive, relatively aggressive, and very combo oriented. What I ended up choosing to do was pairing it with basically 5 colored dirtle piles. And part of that was, again, sort of in the social nature, I felt like if I'm going to own 2 Two-Birds, the 2 more common moods that people may go for are this sort of lean, aggressive, interactive versus let's do the craziest things that we can. And then if we mash those 2 things together, that'll create like a relatively balanced and well curved format. I actually also, maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. I think in a similar way, when you wrote your first modular Two-Bird article, where particularly you were talking about the spooky modular Two-Bird, I thought it was a really, really intelligent way of sort of taking separate models and putting it in harmony. I'm sure you'll talk about that more in detail, but the idea is, the spooky cube is basically very graveyard centric, and there's always a problem with white. But maybe you could design a Two-Bird where sort of white is almost separate, and that's what you get when they mesh together. I thought that was very, very clever.
Oh, well, thank you. And yeah, I definitely think that if the idea is that you're going to play the 2 Two-Birds together sometimes, you need to have some kind of unifying theme across both. And it doesn't have to be in your face. And a theme might even be a strong way to put it, but you have to have 2 designs that work with the other in mind. And the first modular Two-Bird I worked on, it was just one, I called it the modular Two-Bird. It was just built opposite the original Two-Bird, which is just a super mid-range cube. And a lot of what informed the original Two-Bird design was just math and attention to mana curve. And this idea that every color gets 1 6-drop, green's a little bit special, it gets a 7 and like a gold 7. But really, there is this high amount of tension around the Titan cycle and Elspeth Sun's Champion. And then stuff is cheaper. Like those are going to be your highest impact cards. Before that, a lot of stuff trades cleanly 1-for-1. There are certainly 2-for-1s in value cards, but they tend to be cards that square off in a way where a lot of stuff just feels very even. And at the end of a match, you'll usually feel like if you played the best of 10, you're not sure who the winner was going to be. And then when it comes to building a complementary cube to that, I saw it as very important to maintain a lot of these paradigms. It would not make sense to me to put more 6-drops in the modular tuber, because you just kind of take away the shine from the stuff that's going on in the original model. So the modular tuber ended up being a very aggressively slanted cube. And I put in some themes there. So every 2-color pair had sort of a informed archetype, and they bled across multiple colors. I know that Naya altogether was sort of a landfall theme. And the most expensive card in that cube is a 5-mana card. And so you make it so the base model is a super mid-range kind of slugfest, and Grave Titan's a big deal. If you want a 6-drop in your black deck and you see that card in a pack, you act now or you lose your chance. But then that cube still has some aggressive elements. It's just usually the case that you care about 4 or 5, maybe 1 or a couple 6-mana spells in your deck. And then you add together this other side that is just much leaner. And suddenly you have some decks where it's like, yeah, that's Grave Titan. I'm curving out at 4 and I'm happy to do it. And so you get this kind of situation where the cubes add together, and there's ways that they complement each other where you have just efficient creatures. You know, a Danto Vanguard is just like a card that you'll play in your controlling white deck because it pressures planeswalkers and stuff like that. You're certainly in a more mid-range environment. But then you put that with the modular tuber, and now there's all these other aggressive creatures, and you don't have to bother with being mid-range or controlling. Now you're just full on aggro. And so you kind of end up with more extreme controlling decks and more extreme aggressive decks when you mix the parts together. I mentioned earlier about getting kind of confused on getting the Doom Blades in the right half of the cube.
Yep.
And that's just sort of the thing where you also have some other cards. It's not just the Doom Blades, but some example, the cards that I always think about that I know where they go because I just know what I put in the original Tubert. But there's also some cross archetype kind of pollination where in that landfall theme, I just have Tireless Tracker and Kazandu Mammoth in the base Tubert. And those cards are just like good mid-range cards. Like one's a card advantage card. One can be a land, so you make your land drop. And then they're just awesome in your landfall aggro deck too. I think if I was building both from the ground up, the Mammoth would probably be on the aggressive side of it, but whatever.
Right.
The point is you want to cross-pollinate what both cubes are up to across both cubes.
Yeah, you need some harmony between the two. As I think the way that you put it, complement is the perfect word, really.
Yeah.
You know, as long as they both have something that is true to them, when you put them together, it's not going to create an environment that's, you know, fundamentally necessarily like true to it's not going to be, it's not possible to have the environment together be what they are separate, right? Because they're different separately. One is very aggressive, one's very mid-rangey. You're not going to be like simultaneously both of those things, but you can support both of those things without fully detracting from the way that they interact with each other.
Exactly. And then the modular spooky Tubert, it's actually really funny. You were talking about being super extroverted and really wanting to be able to support big drafts with any cube that you maintain. I had an experience playing the full original 8-person spooky cube within the last year where we were doing a draft and I was just like, I finished my 3-game match and I'm just waiting a half hour for a game. And I was just thinking, I really like this cube, but this has taken too long. And that's when I started thinking about the idea of boiling down the spooky cube into a tuber so I could just play it with 1 or 3 other people. And I had that thought, and this is something that comes up anytime somebody talks about one of their graveyard cubes, like, should the cube even have white cards? Because white does so little with the graveyard. And I had thought after I started looking at, maintaining Madness and Delirium and all this graveyard stuff and what I wasn't playing. And I just thought, actually, I independently, before this point, this is some relevant backstory. I had built a different Tubert that just had human tribal as a theme. And it had some other stuff going on. It was kind of a weird design. It was like based off of Ikoria and Khans of Tarkir. So it was like a heavily 3-color wedge cube. And human tribal just kind of made sense kind of across really all of the wedges. So I had that going on. And I really liked the human tribal stuff. I learned some stuff about multicolor and Tubert. So that's a topic for another day. But anyway, I wanted humans tribal in a cube, and then it made sense to me that I already worked on the modular Tubert. Well, what if I just have one Tubert that is really evocative of Spooky Cube, and it has all of these bizarre spells, like this side of the cube has Radical Idea, and these spells matter cards that really care about madness or playing out of the graveyard. And this other half of the cube has humans tribal, and that's where you're going to find Ponder and Preordain, and like, you will play these cards. There's going to be natural cross-pollination there. They are really odd. You wouldn't necessarily think, looking at the human side of it, that you want all these like cards for really niche archetypes, but they do just kind of work. And a lot of that is just planting a ton of humans in both halves of the cube.
That's very smart. Yeah, and I imagine like it probably took a while to come to the right mix of everything.
Oh, definitely.
I mean, it seems like it's a balance that could definitely be off, but it's almost like so something that's a little annoying to me about my 540. I mentioned how I tested archetypes by adding that modular package, but still, like, testing anything is the biggest pain because it takes so much time, so much effort, and then maybe nobody drafts it. Right? Like you don't even get data on it today. And so 6 months, maybe you have some understanding, but you're still going to be at a low sample. When you're talking at least about Tuberts, you can burn through drafts quickly, and it's very easy to say, okay, I'll draft this since I'm going to see a majority of it. Let's see how that goes. And so here you almost have this opportunity to have this like 360 card cube in these other Tuberts in which you can like more aggressively come to the right conclusions about what should be where and how much redundancy you need for different things, so on and so forth.
For sure. Yeah, that's something that comes up now and again, talking about these small cubes, is changing 5 cards can actually have a really dramatic impact on the play experience.
Yeah.
Certainly if you're talking about really significant archetype driving cards, if you start messing around with those big 5 and 6 mana spells, that'll just come up just more often in long games than they won't, just by the nature of how it works playing an attrition game of Magic.
Yeah, exactly. Imagine you have a Tubert, and the difference in how you play matches changes wildly if that Tubert has a single copy of Wrath of God or 0.
Right. Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah, and that's just one card, and you have other concepts like you said with 6 drops, but overall, anytime you're really seeing the whole cube, and you're always like. One of the things that I've always enjoyed about 2-player drafts is that it almost feels like things matter more because I guess it's a little bit more analog of constructed. You have a better idea of what's in their deck, what they've seen. Tuberts are similar in that way. But yeah, small changes, every little thing matters, even if it doesn't necessarily seem like it does on a macro level. It really does change. So I definitely think being meticulous about how you include or exclude cards is a good thing, but also that you should. The nice thing about something like a Tubert is you have the time and the energy to try out more things as well.
Right. You can just make meaningful changes and feel the impacts just much easier.
Yeah, right. Like imagine I don't know if you've done this, but you're drafting your Tubert with a friend, and you play your match, and it's like, hey, let's do this again, but let me just like cut these 3 cards.
I have done that. Yeah, and then the other note. This is another time I'm gonna we already mentioned this episode, but it's going to be important to bring up our preference for Singleton here again, because we had this conversation when you were talking about starting to work on the 2 Tuberts, where you're talking about you run into actually a lot of difficulty with like the last 10 cards on either side of a cube, where it's like, well, I already used all of these generic cards. I kind of ran out of the really specific stuff that I know works with my theme. And I kind of mentioned, well, you know, if you have a ponder on both sides, like that's not the most egregious way to break Singleton. And you were just like, I will not.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's something icky about, look, it's each their own. And we covered this in the Singleton episode, but I don't want to see it back with 2 of the same card in it.
Yeah. I will say that specific example is actually, in my mind, the worst way to break Singleton. Like if you just double up on Ponder, it's like, oh, cool. Ponder's great. Now I have 2 of them. Whatever. Yeah. It's like, if you double up, if like there's some really kind of weird thing that works in both of your cubes, and like there's some 3 or 4 mana permanent that's good, that's a spot where I think it makes more sense and it's more exciting to have that redundancy. Yeah. But at the end of the day, I did put in extra work to make sure I could maintain Singleton on these projects, and I will continue to do so in the future.
One of the harder ones with it is the mana bases, depending on the different power level or whatever you're at. Like if you're only going to have, you know, fetches and shocks in one of them, you know, the other one is just going to have worse mana bases, right?
Yep. Yeah, and that's actually something in my experience, like if you put fetch, shock, ABU duel in a 180 card cube, color doesn't matter anymore. Like you've actually eliminated part of the core design of the game. Like every deck is just like 5 color if it wants to be.
Right.
Like that threshold is convincingly too much mana fixing.
Yeah, especially because this is for like 2 players where you see the whole queue, right?
Right, exactly. Or just 4 players where you draft all 180. It's like you could have 4 or 5 color decks. Like there's just enough going on there. I really like splitting fetch lands and fetchable lands.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah.
So like you get it when you put them together, but your mana base is overall, but you don't have. Does that make how hard is it when you do that to draft 3 color decks? I guess is my main question. Like how much are you losing from that?
You're looking more at playing 2 color decks, splashing a 3rd, but that's very much within reach.
Cool.
And you probably do something. It tends to be fetch shock on one side, ABU duels on the other.
Right.
And just with fetches and shocks, your mana can be very good. You're susceptible to losing to aggressive decks, but like that should happen to 4 and 5 color decks, especially in 2022 Magic. If you're like getting up to Omnath style stuff, like that should come at a cost. But
yeah, did you know my the first cube that I built was actually not fully Singleton. You know, the main reason was I didn't own duels yet, and so what I did is I doubled up on shocks. I just made them. I made sure that they were all different art. And I actually I have a vivid memory of really liking the dynamics of double shock, and that like the mana just wasn't free like it is when you have a dual land. I remember really liking that.
Yeah. I mean, I get a little bit more attached to shock lands all the time. They're just like some of the best designed Magic cards in the history of the game.
Yep.
Not surprising that they have reprinted them multiple times for standard play.
Yeah. They're great. I wish I understood that they were great. I was, you know, when I was a kid, I have memories of like not being the most. Not my smartest moment as, you know, a 10-year-old child, but am I expecting 10-year-old me to be that smart? Maybe. Of like reading like a Guildgate and reading a Shockland and going, this Guildgate doesn't hurt me, it's better.
Oh, yeah, I got some stories. And rather than get into them, I do want to talk about what I see as kind of the next step. If we're talking about modular Tuberts, I have these multiple designs with 2 180 card halves. I very much think you can do at least 3 Tuberts without breaking Singleton, designed to mix and match 2 of them for an 8-player draft, or even just all 3 together. And you can play 8 or get up to 12 players with that. Whether you want to keep something to 2, maybe you have a cube or an idea for a modular cube, or you have 2 distinct themes that you think can work together, but they feel really distinct, so it makes sense to split them. The big advice I would give is to design every module from the ground up together. That's going to make it a lot easier to split up the Doom Blades and the cantrips and all that sort of thing. And kind of as you go, maybe you have like a tribal thing, or even just making sure that you have some aggressive support or getting some creatures in the right place so it makes sense to split the removal spells the way you want to. Because even if one side of the cube is more aggressive and one is controlling, you still want some removal on the controlling side, but then you also got to have some targets for the removal. So a lot of cascading stuff going on, which is all to say it's a lot easier to work on them all at the same time, because invariably, whether it's at some point in your design or just a new set comes out, here's what happens when you want to add a card to these cubes. You cut something. Yeah, maybe it was expendable. Maybe you're actually fully cutting it to the cube. But in my experience, you're going to have some cut this card from this cube, put this card in, take the card you cut from that cube, put it in a different module, cut a card from that module. That's what refining these lists actually tends to look like in my experience. So
yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
So the more you can work on building them all simultaneously, the better, and the less of your own hair you'll pull out in the process.
Yeah, but you still probably will pull out your own hair, just to be very clear.
There's just no way around it. Yeah, but that's true whether your cube is modular or not.
Yeah. I definitely feel like if I think about any time I've ever designed any cube, there's definitely the hand on the forehead thinking, kind of like tugging at your hair that happens almost every time. Yeah, one of the things that's interesting about the idea of like 3 or more is when you get to specifically 3, I'd be curious. I don't know if you've thought about this, but sort of like the idea of like macro, like each tubert supporting a macro. So together, when you add them all together, or even just 2 out of the 3, you get to sort of cultivate an environment based on the type of magic that you've like to play. I think we've talked about this before. Like if you have like an all aggressive cube, you don't actually, because like different people and different games are going to have to ask you to play different roles. So you end up playing the controlling role, even if all the decks are aggressive, because both players can't always be the beatdown. But if you could design, like, let's say you design 3 tuberts, an aggro tubert, a control tubert, and a mid-range tubert that are basically all fundamental mirrors of each type of, macro archetype. And then together you end up with a, hopefully balanced list where you could draft any of the 3.
Yeah.
Kind of cool.
Yeah, I absolutely think you can accomplish that. And with the 3, I think you could also go down a paradigm where things get even a little bit more complicated, where you have one module that's heavily geared towards control, one that's heavily geared aggressive, make sure you cross-pollinate in a way where these 2 can function together. And a third, the example I'll use is just like the spooky cube, and then just making sure that the cards overlap or don't overlap, rather, if we're maintaining Singleton, right, in a way where you have these 2 distinct 360 card cubes you can find you using that spooky module, for example. And like, all right, this is what it looks like when you turn up the heat, and this is really aggressive. And this is what it looks like everybody's trying to be controlling.
Yeah. And then it's kind of funny, right? Because then you've ended up, you bought 540 cards, but you have 1, 2, 3, you own 4 cubes, which is kind of funny.
You own 6 cubes, don't you? You have 3 pairs of 2 and 3 tuberts.
Oh, I forgot even to count the tuberts.
7 if you shuffle them all together.
7 if you shuffle them all together. 7 cubes. 540 cards, 70, that's value.
Yeah, absolutely. And like the cube space is already so done. I'm sure we lost a lot of like introductory cube designers earlier in the episode, cube is already this infinite space. This is beyond the scope that I expect most cube designers to get into. But if you're still with us, like, that is genuine excitement. Like, the idea of having 540 cards and having it be 7 cubes is just like so berserk and awesome to think about for me.
Yeah. That's one that one's gonna keep me up at night. That's okay.
And then the last cube I want to talk about, this isn't exactly a modular cube. It can be treated as one if you want to implement this yourself. But I've had this cube experience with a cube that a friend designed that is unlike any cube I've ever played. And for that reason, it's so difficult to have it come up naturally in a conversation. And this is the opportunity that makes the most sense to me. But my friend Max built something that he called the self-learning cube. And what it was a 720 card cube. And where you drafted it is your last pick out of every draft. Everybody's last pick was cut from the cube. It was relegated to the B cube. I called it the under cube. And over time, you get more and more cards that were last pick that were relegated. You get 24 cards for every draft if it's an 8-person draft, right? Everyone's got 3 15s. And then you get up to the point where you actually just have 2 cubes. And I think that there is some interesting design space here. I actually really like pushing a version of this cube with like hidden information that matters off the top of my head, just like having a good amount of morphs and foretell cards and just not knowing if it's in the A cube or the B cube is actually really funny to me. I think 720 is maybe tough. Part of the issue with the cube is like, it's really difficult to have a narrow power band at 720 cards.
Yeah.
We unfortunately, at least at this point, have not gotten to the point where there's a full B cube. It's close. I think we're like within 2 or 3 drafts, but it just doesn't exist yet. And drafting the A cube at this point has gotten kind of tedious because like with mini cubes, the blue is just like the best. And so it's just like you either open up the good counter spells or lose to the good counter spells is just kind of part of the experience. But I do think that there is a more refined version of this cube that could be really awesome. And it is also a lot easier to do it as a 360 card cube, which then would push you towards potentially doing the modular 2-bert module, where you can have a really deliberate 360 card cube. And, you know, over time, it becomes these 2 cubes, and one of them is the B cube, one is the A cube, and you mark them to keep them separate. You have to come up with a system to upgrade cards or promote cards from B to A. Maybe like whatever deck wins the draft, like promotes some cards, and like you go back and forth in drafting the cube, or have some kind of more grandiose competition, you know, something to figure out. Like the initial curating the 1 cube into 2 cubes is easy. It's just last picks. From there, you get a little fancy.
Yeah, this is a great example of why what cube is just limited by your imagination.
Yeah. Whatever you want to do, you can do it. You just got to think about it for a while. In my specific case, you know, some of the stuff I ended up putting together literal years on the back burner, which might sound discouraging to some, but you know, if for me, like seeing them come to fruition after that amount of time is really exciting and really fulfilling.
Oh yeah, that's definitely. I mean, I think I mentioned this cube once before. That was like my squee cube, which I don't think I have the list for anymore. I used to actually have a list for it, but Cube Tutor I don't think exists anymore. Mm-hmm. I probably should have gotten it. But
right.
I had thought about. I almost purchased 8 altars of squee before I built the cube to like just do it. But I had been thinking about that for at least 2 years before I built it, and then when I actually ended up building it for a while, it made me so happy.
Definitely, that rules. But that is kind of what I got about modular cubes, modular 2-bert, little bonus content of the self-learning cube. Anything relating to modular cubes you'd like to touch on before we close up today?
No, other than the fact that it's like it's an exciting concept that a lot of people have thought about and many haven't pulled the trigger on. And if you're close to pulling the trigger, I say just go do it.
Yeah, there's no time like the present. All right. Well, thank you so much for sticking with us this week, whether you are interested in building a modular cube or not. I hope that we kept a bunch of people just on the basis of curiosity. But anyway, I am Ryan Overturf. You can find me at Ryan Overdrive on Twitter. You can find my articles about many things Cube every week on StarCityGames.com. This week, I believe that Supreme Draft Vintage Cube is back on Magic Online, which I'm hoping to write about that. I certainly will be drafting it. Ryan, where can we find you?
All right, y'all can find me at RC Saxe on Twitter. At the moment, I'm not writing for SEG as we're sort of at the end of Crimson Vow. When the new limited set comes out, you may find me Tuesdays and Thursdays potentially writing for the new limited set. At the moment, if you want to engage with my content, check my Twitter. I'm currently working on pushing to Mythic on Arena with an algorithm that I wrote that does all the drafting and deck building for me. I am almost there. I'm at D1 with a couple pips, I believe. So that should happen in the next few days, which is pretty exciting.
That's like the exact step below, right?
Yep. Yeah. I technically, and my current draft has the 7-mana Mythic Bomb Rare Demon. So this might be the draft that gets me there. We'll see.
Nice. That rules. I don't play a ton of Arena. I always confuse Platinum and Diamond.
Right.
I don't have to worry about it this month, though, because I automatically qualified for the next qualifier weekend with my 7-0 Embercleave deck in the Arena Cube Decathlon.
Wow, sick brags.
Hopefully you're able to make that with your bot. That's really cool that you've made it this far. Hopefully you hit weekend soon. Definitely check out Ryan's stream for that content. And if you like what you heard today, subscribe to the 540. We really appreciate it if you do. Or even just leave a comment, whatever, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon, Stitcher, YouTube, wherever you find your podcast, however you want to engage, we appreciate it. And we'll see you next time.